So what we're going to do today is a brief discussion of ethics to make sure that all the tools that you've learned this semester can be used in service of psychology, and that you have a guiding way of making decisions in terms of what is a beneficial ethical decision and what is not. So we're going to very, very briefly take a look at the ethical principles of psychologists and the code of conduct. So we'll very briefly talk about the overall goals, but most of today is going to be spent taking a look at a very unethical psychology experiment, the Stanford Prison experiment, and taking a look at where those ethical violations occurred, what they were, and then what their effects were in terms of harm for the people involved. All right, so our brief sort of primer for this ethical look is going to be this idea of the overall goals that the ethical guidelines in psychology are trying to obtain. And these overall goals are specific for experiments. So if you're doing experimental psychology, what is it that you're trying to ethically achieve? What are you trying to ethically safeguard? And these are the four goals that have been identified. So when we're watching today's video on the Stanford Prison experiment, there's going to be numerous examples of a violation of protection of subjects from harm. So you're going to see how subjects were harmed, during the experiment, and then continue to be harmed after the experiment as well. You're going to see violations of informed consent, which then led to the harm that occurred. So informed consent is the idea that you should be presented with enough information about an experiment to decide whether or not you do want to volunteer or you don't want to volunteer, whether you do consent to the procedure or you don't consent to the procedure. And as you're going to see, the informed part of informed consent was violated during this experiment as well. Freedom to withdraw is another goal that we protect while doing experiments. Basically, the freedom at any time to be able to say, that's it, I'm done, I'm leaving, I'm withdrawing myself from the situation. And we'll see violations of that as well. So keep an eye out for that and the harm that results. And then lastly, confidentiality, or an understanding of the degree to which your information will remain private. So different experiments have different levels of confidentiality, but again, this is something that needs to be part of the informed consent, so that you can take a look at the amount of privacy that is being afforded to you, the amount of confidentiality, and basically say, yes, that's enough for me to participate, or no, I don't want to, if my data is going to be used in that way. So keep an eye out for that as we do this, take a look at this video. And again, just to kind of give you a little bit of context, this happened in 1971 at Stanford University under the supervision of Philip Zimbardo. And really, kind of amazingly, it was a simulated prison environment. And usually, if you're doing psychological work into something that is clearly unethical to do for real, usually what you do is you just do a simulation. So for example, in the halo effect experiment we took a look at, it would be unethical to deny people's real scholarships for real to find out that psychological information, but it's completely ethical to just say, let's run a simulation where we'll see what would happen. So that's what they try to do here, but as we'll see, it's no guarantee just because you do a simulation that you're not going to be doing harm. So these ethical considerations need to be part of every experimental consideration in terms of its decisions, and we'll see that in the video Quiet Rage, which we will watch at this time. So at certain times during the video, I'll stop just to kind of get a little bit of observational analysis and feedback on it. But this was, you'll see footage of what happened in 1971, and you'll understand why Milgram, so we saw Milgram's experiment last time. You'll see why Milgram, after the Stanford Prison experiment occurred, went up to Philip Zimbardo at a conference and gave him a hug and said, thank you, because I no longer have the only horrible psychology experiment in the history of psychology.
Yes, right down the hall here. This is where it all happened in the summer of 1971. Right down this corridor, in the basement of the psychology department, is where we converted these offices and storage rooms to prison cells. And we had students like yourself, college students from all over the country, play the roles of either prisoners or guards. This was the yard, the prison yard. Here in this closet was solitary confinement, the infamous hole where the guards put prisoners for punishment. That part was screened off, and there was a hidden camera that recorded everything that happened, exactly where the video crew is now. Here's one of the rooms that was a cell. In fact, I have a box of old stuff from the experiment I'd like you to see. And here's a box with the old memorabilia from our study. The sign. This is one of the prison's uniform, prisoner 819. You can see it's really a dress. Here are the chains that the guards made the prisoners wear to remind them of their status. The military kind of uniforms the guards wore, their billy club, symbols of power and authority. And you can see over the wall, one of the prisoners etched the days of the week to mark the passage of time, starting on Sunday, Monday, through the rest of the week.
How long did the study last?
Well, we're going to run it for 2 weeks, but we had to end it after only 6 days.
What was that?
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Our goal, back in 1971, was to study the behavioral and psychological consequences of becoming a prisoner or prison guard. To do this, we decided to simulate a prison environment, both physically and mentally, and then observe the effects of this institution on all those within its walls. We used the basement of the psychology building to stage our little drama, scheduled to run for 2 weeks. The corridor of small offices was converted into a functional prison environment. It was complete with 3 cells. There was a guard's room, the warden's office, my superintendent's office, and a closet used if necessary for solitary confinement. We recruited the help of some prison experts to assist us with our prison design and construction. Foremost among them is Carl Prescott, an ex-convict recently released from serving 17 years behind bars in San Quentin and Soledad prisons. We placed an ad in the city newspaper asking for participants for an experiment studying the psychological effects of prison life. They would be paid $15 a day. Over 70 people applied. They were given diagnostic interviews and psychological tests to weed out all those with any signs of psychological abnormality, medical disabilities, or history of crime or drug use. 24 were selected. They were all healthy, normal, intelligent, middle-class males from colleges throughout the United States. And with a flip of the coin, each was randomly assigned to play the role of prisoner or guard. It was only by chance that someone was chosen as prisoner or guard. Now, it is important to remember that at the start of this experiment, there were no psychological differences between those students assigned a prisoner role and those assigned to be guards. An undergraduate student, David Jaffe, took on the role of prison warden. I acted as the prison superintendent, while psychology graduate students Craig Haney and Kurt Banks handled a variety of prison staff responsibilities. I met with the students selected to be guards on the day before the experiment was to begin. I had to explain to the guards that they could not in any way hit the prisoners, but they could create in the prisoners feelings of boredom.
All right, so we'll stop right there. So at the beginning, you can see that they did try to take into account that they were going to protect the subjects from harm. So they had the meeting with the prison guards, and they basically told the guards, you can't hit the prisoners. You can't use physical violence against the prisoners. because they were trying to protect the prisoners from that harm. But as we're going to see, they didn't have other safeguards in there, like informed consent, like an understanding of confidentiality, and like the freedom to withdraw, which then added to the harm that the subjects encountered.
It's a frustration.
Frustration can create a sense of fear in them to some degree, can create a notion of arbitrariness, that their life is totally controlled by us, by the system, you, me, Jackie, that they'll have no privacy at all. Their cells, sleeping in rooms with bars on them, that there'll be constant surveillance. Nothing they do will go unobserved. They have no freedom of action. They can do nothing or say nothing, and we don't. But it takes away their individuality in various ways. In general, what all this leads to is a sense of powerlessness. That is, we have total power in the situation, and they have none. So what's going to happen tomorrow is we told students to wait in their houses or rooms where the squad cars don't pull up. Two police are going to come out and ask the guy's name, visit him, that he's been suspected of a crime on the phone. They'll just leave it vague and say drugs or something. Come with us, handcuff them, put them in the car, take them down to the police station, take them to the security underground entrance, detain them, fingerprint them, book them, blindfold them, and then hurt and pray them, pick them up, so the blindfold everyone knows they are moving out, then bring them down here, take the blindfolds off, and they'll be in prison. And we're going to take their clothes off, delouse them with a powder spray, put on a uniform. Some people make uniforms sometimes. They're just going to be like warm smocks with numbers on, and they'll have rubber shower shoes. And that's all. No one imposes anything. They're going to wear a chain on one leg, which is just a symbolic thing of their loss of freedom. So the police have agreed to do this. I just have to go down and double check, give them names and so forth. Will this be done by campus security or by reading?
Police car pulls up in front, and a cop comes to the front door, knocks, and says he's looking for me. So they took me out the door, they put my hands against the car. It was a real cop car, I was a real policeman, and there were real neighbors in the street who didn't know that this was an experiment. And there was cameras all around, and neighbors all around it. They put me in the car, then they drove me around Palo Alto. They took me to the police station, the basement of the police station. Then they put me in a cell. I was the first one to be picked up, so they put me in a cell, which is just like a room with a door with bars on it. You could tell it wasn't a real jail. They locked me in there in this degrading little outfit. They were taking this experiment too seriously.
All right, so we have our first example of a violation. So did anybody see what the violation was in terms of protection of harm, in terms of informed consent, freedom to withdraw, and confidentiality? At least two of those were violated. Yep. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the one that was definitely violated, there was confidentiality. So his participation in this experiment was not protected. The fact that he was a subject in this experiment was not protected, and he was dragged out in front of his friends and neighbors, and that could cause harm. I mean, his neighbors probably were wondering, why is he getting arrested? It could affect his social standing. It could affect his interactions with his, with his neighborhood. So that was a violation of confidentiality. A related violation to there was clearly informed consent, because he was definitely surprised. He was definitely surprised that, oh my gosh, there was real police and there was I was brought out into a real street. So if it was the case that and again, this is part of the reason why so much of ethics in experimentation depends on the subject making decisions for themselves. This individual knows his own situation. And if he was told in that informed consent that, look, we're going to be picking you up with real police and we're going to take you out into your neighborhood and put you in a squad car, that's what's going to be happening. People are going to be able to see you. At that point, he can take a look at his own situation and say, you know what? I'm fine with that. I don't see my neighbors won't really care, so I'm good. I'll participate. Or, you know what? No, because I have to, I have business relations with my neighbors. I babysit their children on occasion, and I'll lose all my business. So no, I will not participate. The harm that he had from a violation of confidentiality could have been avoided if the informed consent was there in the process.
When I first got here, even though there was I had to strip and go through the process, and they would call me names and made me look in the mirror and see how ridiculous I was and stuff, I still didn't feel at all like this in prison. I was just looking at it as a job, and I was told not to talk, say anything. I was placed in the cell, and there was another prisoner in there, but still I looked at it as a job the whole first day.
Well, gentlemen, here it is time for count.
At 2:30 a.m., the prisoners were rudely awakened from their sleep by the night guard shift for their count. The guards were told to routinely perform counts to familiarize the prisoners with their numbers and determine that they were all present and accounted for. But more important, it provided a regular occasion for the guards to interact with and exercise control over the prisoners. There were several counts every day and night. As you can see in this first count, the prisoners were not yet into their roles. They weren't taking it too seriously. They were still trying to assert their independence. The guards were also having some trouble with filling out their new roles, trying to assert some authority over their prisoners.
Well, the first day I was on the job, I knew it was going to be tough because what we were supposed to do was supposed to try to make prisoners lose all sense of identity, and I really didn't think I was going to be able to do it. So the first day I just sort of watched the others on my shift, really.
Because the first day passed without incident, we were surprised and totally unprepared for the rebellion which broke out on the morning of the second day. When waking the prisoners for the 10 o'clock count, the morning guard shift found that the prisoners in cell number 1 had removed their stocking caps, ripped off their numbers, and barricaded themselves inside the cells by putting their beds against the door. The prisoners began to taunt and curse the guards to their face. This, of course, embarrassed and upset the guards. The morning shift immediately called in reinforcements. They asked the night shift to stay on, and they called up 3 other standby guards to help put down the rebellion. In retaliation for the prisoners' insubordination, the guards stripped naked the prisoners in cell 2 and 3 and removed their beds. And they demanded that the barricade be removed from cell 1. One of the ringleaders of the rebellion, prisoner 8612, protested loudly. The guards threw him into the hole. The other leader of the rebellion, prisoner 5704, had his feet chained together by the guards. The rebellion was temporarily crushed. But a new problem faced the guards. They realized that 9 guards could, of course, control 9 prisoners. But how could a regular shift of only 3 of them maintain control over the prisons without using physical force? One of the guards came up with the idea of using psychological tactics instead of physical ones. The guards set up a privilege cell, and prisoners who were least involved with the rebellion were put in there and given special privileges. They got their uniforms back, they were allowed to wash themselves and brush their teeth. The others were not. Beds were returned to the privileged cell. Prisoners in the privileged cell were offered a special meal, while the others were only allowed to watch. Yet the privileged prisoners refused to eat the special meal, showing their solidarity with the punished prisoners. Prisoner 1037 refused to come out of the hole until all the beds had been returned. The prisoners seemed to be winning. The guards took measures to increase their control over the prisoners, making them do push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks to punish them. The guards began to implement more strip searches. Every aspect of a prison's behavior fell under the total arbitrary control of the guards or on any given shift. Prisoners who had been rewarded were now punished by the guards for no reason. Going to the toilet became a privilege that a guard could grant or deny. And after the 10 p.m. lockup, the prisoners had to urinate and defecate in a bucket, which was left in their cells. And on occasion, the guard would refuse to let the prisoners empty that bucket until morning, and the cells began to smell. The harassment by the guards and the worsening of prison conditions got to prisoner 8612, the rebellion leader. He decided he had enough. He wanted out. So he started complaining of headaches and stomach pains. 8612 was interviewed by the staff. The ward was unsympathetic. Our ex-convict prison consultant, Carlo Prescott, ridiculed him as a white boy unable to cope with minimal prison hardships. And I, as the superintendent, offered him a deal. No more guard harassment of him in return for some information from time to time. In short, I asked him to be a snitch. I told him, think it over and let me know your decision later that night.
All right, so we have a couple of violations there. So anybody catch the which of the 4 ethical principles in this case were violated? Yep.
The freedom to withdraw.
So freedom to withdraw is the big one that was violated here. We have protection of subjects from harm was also violated, so we'll just mention that one briefly. Having to defecate in a bucket and then having that not be removed from your living quarters is just unsanitary, it's just unhygienic, it's just unhealthy. So that kind of harm was present there. And there's psychological harm and there's physical harm. But most importantly, and this is going to be one of the sort of themes throughout the entire experiment, freedom to withdraw was violated. So this one prisoner at one point decided, I've had enough. And like many psychology experiments, sometimes they're unpleasant. Sometimes they involve harm during the experiment. And to make sure that a subject is protected, it's always up to the subject how much they're willing to put up with. So if I have even if I have an experiment where I tell a subject, oh, here's 50 pages of this pamphlet, read them all. If the subject just feels like that's not something that they signed up for, they can say, you know what, I really don't want to do this, I'm out of the experiment. So when this subject came to Zimbardo, he should have had the freedom to withdraw. As soon as he came forward and said, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to go, Zimbardo should have said, all right, thank you very much for participating. You are free to go and we'll debrief you and all that, all those procedures. Instead, they convinced him to go back into the prison. So everything that happens to that prisoner after this moment could have been avoided. All the harm that he's about to go through could have been avoided if they had just had that ethical guideline of freedom to withdraw. And as we're going to see, it also snowballs because all the other prisoners then also feel as if they've lost their freedom to withdraw as well.
Confused, 8612 returned to the yard during the evening count and told the other prisoners that no one could get out.
8612, against the wall. Against the wall, 8612. Somebody help
kid in Manchester, ice skating.
If I gotta be in here, I'm not gonna put up with any of your shit. I mean, you know, really, I mean, I couldn't get out. I don't know, start talking to doctors and lawyers.
Help him against the wall.
Obviously, this news coming from one of their respected leaders had a dramatic impact on the other prisoners.
He said, you can't get out. And then you really felt like you were a prisoner. You maybe it was a bonus experiment, and maybe you would get paid for it, but damn it, you were a prisoner. You were really a prisoner.
I was told that I couldn't quit. And at that point, I felt that, well, it was really a prison. And at that point, I don't know, there's no way I can describe how I felt. I just felt totally hopeless. More hopeless than I'd ever felt before.
There were no more signs of rebellion in the prison. But prisoner 8612 couldn't believe that he had lost all control over his situation. His confusion amplified the frustration and feelings of helplessness that he was experiencing. 8612 decided that the only way to get out was to show everyone he had gone crazy. Then they would have to release him. He began to play the role of the crazy person, but soon the role became too real as he went into an uncontrollable rage.
You don't know, I gotta go. I to a doctor, anything. I can't see him. I'm fucked up. I don't want to explain. We're all fucked up inside. Help me out! Help me now! God damn it! Fucked up. You don't know. God. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside. Don't you know?
Less than 36 hours into the experiment, we had no choice to release prisoner 8612.
All right, so finally they release prisoner 8612, but all of the harm that prisoner 8612 went through, that psychological breakdown that he was experiencing, could have been avoided if only the freedom to withdraw was honored, if only that guiding principle was still there. And then also the feelings of hopelessness that the other prisoners started to experience and the harm that they're going to go through also gets amplified and also would have been avoided if that freedom to withdraw was there. So that's a very important aspect of the ethical guidelines to protect in terms of protecting your subjects.
Tuesday was visiting day. We were worried that once the parents saw the condition of our jail, they would want to take their sons home. We decided to manipulate both the prisoners and the visitors to preserve our institution. First, we cleaned the prison and groomed the prisoners. The guards took down the sign over the hole, fed the prisoners a hot meal, and warned them not to complain or the visiting hour would be cut short. When the visitors arrived, they were first greeted by an attractive receptionist, Susie Phillips. Music was piped in over the intercom system. The visitors were made to register and then to wait half an hour while their sons were finishing a late dinner with some extra dessert. We wanted to undercut any complaints the prisoners would make by having the situation be so obviously pleasant and benign. Also, we wanted the parents to attribute some unexpected inconveniences to their sons' neglect in writing to them about a number of visiting rules and regulations. Visits were monitored by a guard, limited to only 2 visitors per prisoner and to only 10 minutes total. Of course, these adults complained about such arbitrary rules, but since they obeyed despite their dissent, the institution had retained its authority in this situation. Visitors left their distressed sons in our jail, content that we were doing a good job in running the simulated prison experiment. Visiting hour went off without a hitch. The hitch.
All right, so I'll briefly mention another violation right there. So in the supplemental materials, you read about the 5 ethical guidelines that APA has put in for psychologists in general. And one of those is fidelity and responsibility, is being trustworthy with the community that you serve, with the people that you serve as psychologists. And this is an example where that has been violated. These parents were lied to during the course of this experiment by psychologists. And that illustrates a very important aspect of ethical principles as well, which is that it's designed to protect a multitude of different facets. So it protects the subjects from harm. It protects the community from harm as well. Those parents were harmed, whether they felt it at that time or not, because their trust in psychology took a hit after this experience. When their sons finally were released and they found out how horrible the conditions were, they probably either explicitly or implicitly made the decision, I'm never trusting a psychologist again. And that's going to prevent them from seeking care for a mental illness. That's going to prevent them from seeking help for any issues that they might have. So the community was harmed. That's another aspect that ethics keeps protected. But then also it protects psychology. So this experiment and that interaction with the community ruined partially or decreased psychology's reputation. Psychology's view as a science that helps individuals, that is a force for good, took a hit from this as well. So ethics protects subjects, community, and psychology as a whole. And as we're going to see as well, it protects the scientists who do psychology. So it is sometimes seen as a hindrance. Sometimes I'll admit that when you're trying to get your study approved and an IRB, the review board is saying, well, you need to change this because of ethical considerations. Sometimes you feel a little bit inconvenienced, but it's important to remember it's there to protect everybody, and it's an important safeguard for our science.
Came after the visit, when the parents had left. The guards had picked up a rumor that the prisoners were planning an escape. According to the rumor, prisoner 8612, whom we had released the day before, was going to return with a bunch of his friends and force the release of the other prisoners. Next, we decided to dismantle the prison and move all the prisoners up to a remote storage room on the top floor. Extra guards were called in to help clean it out and transport the inmates and bolster security. The plan was for me to be waiting in the basement in the empty corridor when 8612 returned with his friends. I would tell them that we decided to end the experiment early and that everyone had gone home. After they left, we would rebuild the prison. We even discussed luring 8612 back and then imprisoning him because he had been paroled under false pretenses. The confrontation never came off. No one ever showed. The guards had wasted the whole day tearing down and then rebuilding their prison, and even missed lunch. Someone was going to pay for all this.
Down. Up.
The guards again escalated very noticeably their level of harassment of the prisoners and increased the humiliation that they made the prisoners suffer.
Down.
Push-ups increased in number and severity. The counts became grueling ordeals lasting for several hours. They made the prisoners clean out toilet bowls with their bare hands and polish the guards' shoes.
It was all sympathy I had for them, and in any respect that might have been present, I just shut out. Then I began to treat them as clearly as possible, as harshly as possible. And by the third day, I had done such a good job convincing myself that I was acting like that. I treated the prisoners like they were of a distinct inferior order than myself.
Smoking is a privilege. Smoking is a privilege. What is smoking? A privilege. What? A privilege.
Prisoner 819 was our next problem. He refused to take part in the 6 a.m. count and to do any exercises. Then he messed up his cell and barricaded himself in. In retaliation, the guards made his cellmates do mindless work, moving boxes back and forth.
You're not only not getting a cigarette, but for as long as the cell's blockaded, you're going to be in solitary when you get out. I'm out, keep it on.
819 was put in the hole. Just then, we were visited by a Catholic priest who had been a real prison chaplain. He had agreed to come down to assess the reality of our situation compared to those he had known. The prisoners were invited to talk with him, and only 819 refused. Some surprising things happened. When introducing themselves, half of the prisoners used their number, not their name. When asked why they were in jail, most answered with the charge told to them by the Palo Alto police. The priest asked them what action they were taking to get out of jail while they were awaiting trial. The prisoners really got confused. He chided them for not knowing their civil liberties and for not getting a lawyer to bail them out. He followed through with his role as prison chaplain by calling some parents to get a public defender for their imprisoned sons. Prisoner 819 finally agreed to meet with the priest. As soon as he was taken out of the hole and he started talking with the priest, 819 broke down crying. I tried to calm him down and took him to a special rest and recreation room down the hall. After a good meal, he could leave if he wanted to. The priest told me that 819 and our other prisoners were acting just like first-timers, who were confused, frightened, and emotional before they got harmed by the prison system. Our jail seemed very real to him. Meanwhile, the guards were assembling the prisoners for the 11:30 count.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
As soon as I realized that 819 could hear this, I rushed to the room where I had left him. And what I found was a boy crying hysterically, while in the background his fellow prisoners were chanting and yelling that he is a bad prisoner and that they were being punished because of him.
All right, so once again, we have harm. Prisoner is now crying hysterically. The emotional abuse just got too much. Once again, all could have been avoided with the freedom to withdraw. So this again gives you that nice example of why that principle is there, why it's so important. Nobody could have predicted how badly this experiment went. Nobody knew that this was going to happen. But all of the harm just could have been avoided if that one principle, freedom to withdraw, was in place. As soon as one of them said, this is too much, this is unreasonable, I'm out of here, if that was allowed, everybody would have eventually left before it got to any of this drastic type of harm.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess.
No longer was this account disorganized and full of fun as it was on the first day of the experiment. Now the account was marked by its conformity, compliance, and absolute unison. It was as if one voice called out that 819 is bad. I tried to console prisoner 819 by offering to let him go, but he insisted on staying. He told me that he couldn't leave knowing that the other prisoners thought he was a bad prisoner. I managed to get through to him by reminding him who he really was, and what this place really was, and who I really was. As that other reality broke through, he agreed to be released from his imprisonment and quit the experiment. To replace prisoner 819, we brought in a new prisoner from the standby list, prisoner 416. Like the others, he was stripped, deloused, and placed in the prison environment. We wondered what effect would this newcomer have on our old-timers who had been through so much. And how would this all look to him? The badness of this place, which had evolved gradually for the other prisoners, was for him full-blown upon arrival. If he rebelled against the guard's authority, would the others follow this new leader or not? Prisoner 416 began his revolt by refusing to eat. He went on a hunger strike. Amazingly, the prisoners were so divided among themselves that instead of rallying around 416, they refused to join him. To them, he was just a troublemaker. The guards used this lack of solidarity displayed by the other prisoners to try to break and control prisoner 416. Ironically, they began by making him sing Amazing Grace.
416, while they do push-ups, you sing Amazing Grace. Ready? Down. Keep going. Grace. Push-ups on your own. Save a wretch like me. Keep going. Once I was blind, and now I see. I was blind, but now I see. If I saw God, I'm free. How's that? Everybody over your back. Oh, stay down there. Stay down there.
By this stage in the experiment, the prisoners had displayed 3 ways to cope with their feelings of frustration, absolute powerlessness, and a growing sense of helplessness and despair. At first, most prisoners fought and rebelled against the guards. By now, 4 of them had reacted passively by breaking down emotionally, forcing us to release them. And still others had reacted by becoming model prisoners. One such prisoner, 2093, was nicknamed Sarge by the other prisoners because of the way he followed the guards' orders so readily. It was also apparent that there were three types of guards. The good guards who felt sorry and did little favors for the prisoners, tough but fair guards who followed the rules, and the sadistic guards who constantly degraded and humiliated the prisoners. As a group, the guards now had total control of the prison, and except for prisoner 416, they had the obedience of every prisoner. They could literally dictate whatever behavior they wanted from them. The guards tested their control over the prisoners by making them write letter home.
No need to visit is 7-7. No need to visit is 7-7. Yours truly, again. Let's hear yours truly. Yours truly. Your loving son. And put the name there that your mother gave you.
At dinner, prisoner 416 refused to eat his sausages left over from lunch.
416 is a prisoner who was extremely dazed at first and upset, and found that, to his surprise, he couldn't respect himself unless he found means to resist, and means that were uniquely his own, means that were best adapted to him. And 416 has found those means, and 416 it means something to me now. As the number is a source of pride, like a name. It's important to me that I'm 416.
Get in that closet then.
He was thrown into the hole in order to hold the sausages in his hands. The guards threatened to cancel Thursday's visiting hour for all prisoners if 416 did not eat his sausages. 416 refused again. The guards then channeled the frustration of the other prisoners by having them express their anger directly at 416, who was in the hole.
Thank you, 416. Okay, sure. Thank you, 416. Oh, yeah, you do just the same way you and Thank you, 416. Okay.
To the guards, 416 represented disobedience. He was a solitary threat to their total power. He was taken out of the hole for the next count. The count was run almost single-handedly by one guard. The prisoners named him John Wayne because of his macho guard performance and tough guy attitude. He used every tactic he could think of, public humiliation, homophobia, whatever, to dominate the prisoners.
416, you got your hands in the air. Why don't you play Frankenstein? 293, you can be the bride of Frankenstein. You stand here. You come over there. You should act it out. You be the bride of Frankenstein, and you be Frankenstein. I want you to walk over here like Frankenstein and say that you love 293.
Yeah, Frankenstein
walk like Frankenstein.
He has to walk like you.
I love you, 293. Get up close. Get up close. I love you, 293. I love you, 293. You smile, 293. Who gets down here and 10 push-ups? 2, 3, 4, 5.
Even Sarge, the obedient prisoner, was abused.
Why are you such a parent? I don't know. Why did you try to be obedient so much? It's my nature to be obedient, Mr. Correctional. You a liar. You a speaking liar. If you say so, Mr. Correctional. What if I told you to get down on that floor and fuck the floor? What would you do then? I would say we didn't know how, Mr. Correctional.
Not one of the prisoners protested the harshness and cruelty of the count. Before lights out, 416 was again put in the hole because he refused to eat his sausages, now filthy from being thrown all over the floor. John Wayne made a final attempt to get 416 to submit by setting the other prisoners against him. He gave the prisoners a choice.
Now, there's a couple ways that we can do this. Depending on what you want to do. Now, if 416 does not want to eat his sausages, then you can give me the blankets and sleep on the bed and mattress, or you can keep your blankets and 416 will stay in another day. Now, what would it be? What would it be over here? How about 546? Well, now you boys got to come to some kind of decision here.
Me too, man. How do you feel about this? We got three in favor of keeping the blanket.
We got three, guess one. Keep your blankets, 416, you're going to be in there for a while. So just get used to it.
I was watching all this on the television monitor in my office with one of my graduate students. I was amazed that the guard would keep that boy in solitary all night as punishment for not eating cold, dirty sausages. I was amazed that the prisoners would keep their blankets instead of letting 416 out of the hole. This was a true prison where frustrated guards acted sadistically against prisoners like 416, who would not submit to their control, and where demoralized prisoners acted selfishly and shamefully. I told her that I was really impressed with what we had accomplished. In less than a week, she looked at me and said, "I think what you were doing to those boys is horrible." And she was right. I had to end the experiment, because that's what it was, an experiment, not a prison. These were real boys who were really suffering, and that fact had escaped me. I and everyone else around me, except for that graduate student, had gotten so far into their prison roles, prisoner, guard, superintendent, whatever, that it was hard to separate reality from the simulation. It just didn't occur to me until she spoke out that I, as a psychologist, as a human being, had to do something about that suffering. I had to end the experiment. I guess I should mention that I later married that very special student, Christina Maslach. But it's important that we look back at what happened during the 6 days of our prison study, because there were many people other than psychologists who accepted our prison as a prison instead of as a psychology experiment.
All right, so I'll pause it right there because this is going to highlight. Now we're past the experiment. We're past the harm that happened during the experiment, and now we're going to start seeing evidence about the harm that happens after the experiment as well. So as psychologists, we're trying to minimize harm that happens during the experiment while also understanding that harm still occurs after the experiment. And Zimbardo is a controversial figure in psychology because he really made his career off of this horrible experiment. So people wonder, should he have the fame and accolades that he achieved if this is the reason why he's so famous? But in this instance right here, you see evidence, it's indirect evidence, but you'll see evidence that Zimbardo himself was harmed for this during this experiment. And what you're going to see right here is him trying to distance himself from any sort of responsibility that he has for this particular experiment. So if you did something that you're proud of, if you do something that you feel that you've accomplished and it's an ethical thing and you're proud of it, you always say, yes, I did that. You know, they're like, oh, did you publish that experiment? And you're like, yes, I did. That's all me. When you are harmed by something, when you feel like some part of yourself has been violated because you did this horrible thing, that's when you start distancing yourself. That's when you start saying, well, yeah, I was involved, but all these other people here, they were also involved, so it's not just me being a horrible human being. So in this case, notice that he does admit, he goes, yeah, you know, I had to put an end, I did put an end to the experiment. But right now he goes through this kind of diffusion of responsibility where he's going to start blaming a whole bunch of other people who could have done something. And again, that's a move that you only do when you have been harmed by a particular action. And now you're trying to protect your ego from any further harm by diffusing any responsibility.
And their actions or lack of actions added to the reality of our simulation. First, there were the parents, who who accepted our arbitrary rules for visiting day, they too became drawn into our prison society by working within our prison system to try and better their son's condition. But even though...
So, right off the bat, he's like, yes, I did a horrible thing, but let's not forget about the parents. It's not just me. They have some responsibility. It's not all on me. Again, not something that you do if you're not experiencing harm for participating in a particular action.
Some of the prisoners told their parents that this was the worst thing that ever happened to them. The parents accepted the perspective the prison authorities had created, and they rejected that of their sons. The power of the situation was stronger than the individual. What about the priest who came to visit the prison? He didn't question the ethics of the experiment as he should have. He ended up giving the boys legal counsel instead of spiritual counsel. So he made the line between reality and illusion even more obscure.
So far he's blamed the parents, now he's gone on to blame the priest, and he's also now going to include a public defender as part of this diffusion of responsibility where he's trying to protect his own identity of his self.
After the priest left, he called some parents who in turn called a public defender to come to the prison. Public defender watched as one by one the boys were brought in, handcuffed, wearing bags over their heads to discuss their individual cases. He was only concerned with informing the prisoners of their rights as prisoners, not acknowledging that they were in fact college students locked up for a week in the basement of the psychology building. On day 5, the prisoners were brought in front of the parole board, consisting of psychology graduate students, secretaries, and others. The head of the parole board was Carlo Prescott, our prison consultant. What was really interesting was that Carlo was finally sitting on the other side of the parole proceedings. And like all the others who had participated in our study, he took on a role, or rather the role took over him. He became the same kind of parole officer who had rejected his parole requests year after year when he was doing time.
What I'm trying to say is that you went outside the door, you had a little time to think. Now you're back in here trying to con us and witness you in a different view. What real social consciousness do you have? What do you really think you want society? I'd like to hear something real from you.
Well, I got a bad job.
Working does not make you a good citizen.
Hey, a teaching job is a good job, I feel. A worthwhile job.
That may even make you more suspect. I don't think I want you teaching them answers.
It was only afterwards that he realized that he was using the same rationale against them, the students, that his parole officers had used against him to reject his parole requests.
I feel I'm ready to go while I'm in here, and I know what my sentence is. So the only hope I have is to just wait it out and try to live it as pleasantly as I can.
I'll tell you something. With your attitude and the way that you've expressed yourself in this particular board meeting, if you were going to definitely make recommendations, I would see to it personally that you were here the last day. Personally.
So we had to stop the experiment after only 6 days. The prisoners and guards were then debriefed, and they all vented their feelings. And then we got together a few months later to analyze the whole experience. They had some interesting things to say about it.
I don't know, at first I thought that maybe I could manage prison for a while. Right now I don't think I could manage it at all. I don't see how anybody really could without coming out really hateful.
What made the experience most depressing for me was the fact that we were continually called upon to act in a way that just is contrary to what I really feel inside.
All right, so that's a very nice example of something that is often overlooked. And again, part of the reason why, as psychologists, we do have to apply critical thinking, and we do have to go back to a lot of the original documents. In just about every review or textbook entry that I've seen of the Stanford Prison Experiment, they have all mentioned the harm that occurred to the prisoners. Everybody has mentioned, the prisoners were harmed, they were forced to do this, they were forced to do that. It was very unethical towards the prisoners. This is one of the first indications that we've seen that it was also unethical and harmed the guards. So this is one of the guards who, and I believe this is like 30 days later, who literally is looking back on it and saying, yeah, it was just depressing. It was depressing to do that kind of stuff, to act in a way that was very contrary. And again, that could have easily been avoided if he had just had the freedom to withdraw. So it's important to, when you apply these ethical principles, really sort of suspend your own sort of narratives or other people's interpretations, because they're often focused on the prisoners here, and rightfully so. They did receive a lot of harm, but there was also harm done to the guards themselves, as we're going to see in 3 instances.
I don't feel like I'm the type of person that would be a guard, just continually giving out shit and forcing people to do things and pushing in line. It just didn't seem like me to continually put on a face like that. It's just really one of the most oppressive things you can do.
I really thought that I was.
All right, so this is 2 months later, 60 days later, and is a nice indication of the harm that can continue. It was only 5 days in the prison, and yet this is 60 days later, and the harm has not ended for some of these individuals.
Incapable of this kind of behavior. I was surprised, I was dismayed to find out that I could really be that I could act in a manner so absolutely unaccustomed to anything I would even really dream of doing. And while I was doing it, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any guilt. It was only afterwards when I began to reflect on what I had done that this behavior began to dawn on me, and I realized that this was a part of me I hadn't really noticed before.
I began to feel that I was losing my identity, that the person that I call Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison, because it was a prison to me, it still is a prison to me. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It's just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state. I began to feel that identity, that the person that I was, that had decided to go to prison, was distant from me, was remote, until finally I wasn't that. I was 416. I was really my number, and 416 was going to have to decide what to do.
Once you put a uniform on and are given a role, a job, saying your job is to keep these people in line, then you're certainly not the same person as if you were in street clothes and in a different role. You really become that person once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick, and you act the part.
So this is John Wayne. He's the one they nicknamed John Wayne. He's the most sadistic of all of the guards. And you'll see this first little part right here where he's trying to distance himself again from what he did. So he's clearly, it's hard to be sympathetic, but he's clearly has been harmed from the actions that he did, because he's not standing up and saying, oh yeah, I did that. I came up with these inventive ways of controlling these guards, and yeah, that was me. I'll take full responsibility. He's sitting there going, well, it was the outfit. You put on the outfit and you become a different person. Not me. I'm going to shield myself from harm and self-reflection, but I'm going to say it was the outfit.
That's your costume, and you have to act accordingly when you put it on.
It harms me. Harms. In the present tense, it harms me.
All right, and this interaction, we'll watch it 2 times. First off, right off the bat, highlights what I've been mentioning, where 416 here is not saying it harmed me. He says it harms me. It still harms. In the present tense, it harms me. 60 days later, 60 days worth of harm from this unethical designed experiment, which once again, freedom to withdraw would have prevented this extra 60 days at least of continuous harm.
How does it harm you? How does it harm you? Just the thing that you know that people can do it?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. I've read about it. I've read a lot about it. But I've never experienced it firsthand. I've never seen someone turn that way. Now, I know you're a nice guy. You understand? I do. I do know you're a nice guy. I don't get that because I know what you can turn into. I know what you're willing to do. If you say, oh, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody. Oh, well, it's a limited situation. It's over in 2 weeks.
Well, you in the position, what would you have done?
I don't know. I can't tell you, but I know what I do.
Would you believe?
I don't believe I would have been as inventive as you. I don't believe I would have applied as much imagination to what I was doing. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand that.
I think I would have been a guard. I don't think it would have been such a masterpiece.
All right, so did anybody notice what 416 was doing there? What was he doing? He was clearly angry at that guard. And he was clearly still trying to get some sort of justice, some sort of. He was still harmed. He was still evidently harmed. And I'll replay it and pay attention to the way that he converses with John Wayne. So when you take a look at John Wayne over here, when you take a look at 416. There's no way that 416 can go up to him and punch him in the face and get vengeance in that way, right? There's no way that he can try to satisfy his need for justice, but he does find a way in the conversation. So he continually interrupts John Wayne in this conversation as a way of basically saying, you used to have power over me, you no longer have power over me now because I'm going to interrupt you time and time again. And if you watch the way that he talks, he pauses as if he's done talking many times, waiting for John Wayne to say something so he can interrupt him again. And then he pauses and waits for John Wayne to say something so he can interrupt him again. And he does it over and over and over again. You can see that the hurt is still there, the harm is still there, and he's just trying to even the odds any way that he can.
And it harms me.
Oh, here we go.
I mean, harms.
So pay attention.
It harms me.
How does it harm you? How does it harm you? Just to think about it, you and the people can be like that?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. I've read about it. I've read a lot about it. But I've never experienced it firsthand. I've never seen someone turn that way. Now, I know you're a nice guy. You know? You understand?
So you can see right there, he goes, I know you're a nice guy, you know? Say something. And as soon as he starts talking, he interrupts him. And he does it again. So notice, that was the first time.
And I do know you're a nice guy. I don't get that because I know what you can turn into. I know what you're willing to do. If you say, oh, well, I'm not going to hurt anybody. Oh, well, it's a limited situation. It's over in 2 weeks.
Well, you in the position, what would you have done?
I don't know. I can't tell you, but I know what I do.
Would you believe?
I don't think.
That's 3.
I don't believe I would have been as inventive as you. I don't believe I would have
4.
applied as much imagination.
You can see John's getting
to what I was
frustrated.
doing. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand that.
I think I would have been a
That's
guard.
number 5.
I think it would have been such a masterpiece.
All right, so you can see in just that one little exchange, 416 is still suffering. He's still having a hard time with this entire situation. And now the last one that we're going to take a look at is John Wayne here. And again, it's hard to be sympathetic with him. This is when you really have to apply your critical thinking and say, let's get rid of all the biases and just try to analyze the situation. And you'll see finally evidence here that once again, John Wayne himself, the most sadistic of the guards, has been harmed by this. He is having trouble reconciling his own self-image with the fact that he had been so sadistic to his fellow students. So in a final sort of attempt to distance his ego from that knowledge, he has this argument here about how it wasn't him or how he really is, because he needs to protect himself. It was all part of a little experiment that he was running.
It was really harmful. It was degrading, and that was part of my particular little experiment to see how I could.
Your particular little experiment. Why don't you tell me about that?
I was running little experiments of my own.
Tell me about your little experiment.
Okay.
I'm curious.
I wanted to see just what
flashing back.
Yeah.
Under the circumstances, and it surprised me that no one said anything to stop me. No one said, Kramer, you can't say those things to me. Those things are sick. Nobody said that. They just accepted what I said. I said, go tell that man in the face he's the scum of the earth, and they'd do it without question. They'd do push-ups without question. They'd sit in the hole. They'd abuse each other. And here they're supposed to have they're supposed to be together as a unit in jail, but here they're abusing each other because I requested them to, and no one questioned my authority at all.
So that last one, I mean, there's two parts there to him, kind of trying to get and protect his own ego from harm. Number one is the idea that he was doing an experiment. So it's not me, it's not what, I didn't do anything horrible. I was just doing an experiment. I was like a scientist. I was like this good, force for good here, just trying to run my own little experiment. So that's the first indication that he has been harmed in this particular exchange. Did anybody catch the second thing he tried to do in terms of responsibility? Yep.
Nobody ever tried to stick up or say anything against him.
Exactly. So all that abuse, all the horrible things that he did, he is literally saying it wasn't my fault. I was just seeing how far you guys would take it. So you could have said no at any time and I would have stopped. So it's your fault. It's your responsibility. And again, you don't do that for something that you're proud of. You don't ever get an A+ on an exam. And then when your friends are asking you, how did you get that A+? You never say, well, I was just doing an experiment. I wasn't going to try to get an A+, but I was going to take my grade as high as my professor would allow me. And then as long as whenever they stopped, I would have stopped. No, you say, hey, I studied real hard. It's all me. I got myself an A+. So you can tell that even this sadistic individual who seemed to not be harmed at all during this experiment actually did end up going through some harm, where 2 months later, he is still unable to say, you know what, I'm just a terrible human being and I have to reevaluate my life choices and maybe go and seek guidance somewhere. Still, he's trying to protect himself from that harm, saying, yeah, it was just an experiment. Oh, and by the way, it was also you guys, the prisoners, who are to blame. All right, so that's what I wanted to see for the Stanford Prison Experiment. Any final questions, comments about anything that we saw today in terms of ethics and protecting psychology, protecting subjects? No? All right, so that is it for the course.